The winter evening was slowly turning darker as the last light of the sun disappeared behind the distant mountains. The sky above had begun changing from pale orange to deep shades of gray and blue, and a quiet stillness spread across the countryside. Snowflakes drifted gently from the clouds, floating through the cold air before settling across the empty country road. The wind moved softly through the tall pine trees that lined the highway, making their branches sway slowly as if whispering secrets to the night. Most people had already left the road hours earlier. Weather reports had warned about a snowstorm approaching the mountain region, and drivers had chosen to reach shelter before the storm grew stronger. Now the road felt almost completely silent, because breaking that silence was the deep, steady rumble of motorcycles. A group of bikers rode together along the long stretch of road, their headlights cutting through the falling snow as their engines echoed across the forest. The glowing beams illuminated the white flakes spinning through the cold air. At the front of the group rode Jack. Jack was easy to recognize even from a distance. He was tall and broad-shouldered with a thick beard that framed his weathered face. His black leather biker jacket was worn from years of riding across thousands of miles of highways. Several patches were sewn across the back of the jacket, small symbols, representing his motorcycle club and the places he had traveled. Each patch carried a story. Years of long rides had shaped Jack into someone who remained calm even when situations became difficult. Behind him rode several of his friends, fellow bikers who had spent years traveling the open road together. Their motorcycles formed a steady line as they rode through the mountain highway. The riders had spent most of the day traveling across the region during a charity ride. They had been visiting several small towns, raising money for children's hospitals along their route. But now the temperature was dropping quickly. Snow was falling more steadily. Jack kept his eyes focused on the road ahead as the wind pushed against his jacket. They were trying to reach the next small town before the storm became too dangerous. Then suddenly, something unusual caught Jack's attention. Near the edge of the road, just beyond the glow of his headlights, he noticed a small shape standing beside the trees. At first he thought it might be a road sign or maybe a broken branch covered in snow. But then the shape moved. Jack slowed his motorcycle. The rumbling engine dropped to a softer growl as he carefully reduced his speed. Behind him, the other bikers immediately noticed and slowed down as well. Their headlights spread across the roadside as they approached the strange figure. As the bright beams illuminated the snowy shoulder of the road, the shape slowly became clear. It wasn't a sign. It wasn't an animal. It was a child. A small girl stood near the edge of the forest beside the road. She looked no older than 6 years old. Her tiny boots were partially buried in the snow as she stood shivering slightly in the cold wind. She wore a small blue winter jacket that looked just a little too big for her thin arms. Her brown hair peeked out from under a wool hat that had slipped slightly to one side. Jack's heart sank when he realized what he was seeing. A child should never be standing alone on a road like this, especially not during a snowstorm. Without hesitation, Jack carefully pulled his motorcycle to the side of the road and brought it to a stop. One by one, the other bikers parked their motorcycles behind him. The engine slowly shut off. The quiet forest returned. Only the soft whisper of falling snow remained. Jack removed his helmet and stepped off his bike. He moved slowly toward the girl so he wouldn't frighten her. Up close, he could see that she looked nervous. Her small hands were clenched tightly together, and her eyes watched the group of bikers carefully. Jack lowered himself slightly as he approached. "Hey there," he said gently. His deep voice carried a calm warmth that felt very different from the cold wind around them. "Are you all right?" The little girl hesitated for a moment. She looked up at Jack's face, then glanced toward the other bikers standing beside their motorcycles. For a second, she didn't speak. Then she stepped a little closer. Her voice was barely louder than the sound of the wind. "No police, please." Jack frowned slightly. The words instantly made the situation feel serious. "What do you mean?" he asked softly. The girl's eyes moved nervously toward the dark forest behind her. The tall trees stood silently in the falling snow. Then she raised her small hand and pointed quietly toward the woods. "My mom is hiding," she whispered. For a moment, none of the bikers spoke. The peaceful winter road suddenly felt very different. Something was wrong. And Jack knew this quiet moment was only the beginning of a much bigger story.
Jack slowly lowered himself down onto one knee so he could speak to the little girl at eye level. The cold winter air drifted quietly through the trees as snow continued falling gently around them. Up close, the girl looked even smaller than she had from the road. Her blue winter jacket was dusted with snow, and her tiny boots were nearly buried in the growing white layer on the ground. A few strands of brown hair had slipped from beneath her wool hat, and her cheeks were slightly red from the cold wind. Jack kept his voice calm and gentle so he wouldn't scare her. "What's your name?" he asked softly. The little girl hesitated for a moment before answering. "Lily," she whispered. Her voice was quiet and shaky, almost like she had been holding her breath for a long time. As she spoke, Lily kept glancing nervously toward the dark forest behind her. The tall trees stood silently under the falling snow, their branches swaying slightly as the wind moved through them. Jack noticed the way her eyes kept shifting back toward the woods. It wasn't just curiosity. It was fear. The kind of fear someone shows when they are worried about what might be hiding nearby. Jack had spent enough years riding through difficult situations to recognize that look immediately. Something was definitely wrong. Behind him, the other bikers stood quietly beside their motorcycles, watching the conversation carefully. The rumble of their engines had faded, leaving only the sound of snow falling softly onto the frozen road. Jack gave Lily a small, reassuring smile. "Why are you out here alone?" he asked gently. Lily didn't answer right away. She looked down at the snow near her boots and rubbed her hands together nervously. The wind pushed another wave of snowflakes across the road as the quiet forest waited around them. Finally, Lily slowly raised her small hand and pointed toward the trees behind her. "My mom is hurt," she said quietly. The words made the situation instantly more serious. Jack's expression changed. He slowly stood up and turned his head toward the dark forest where Lily had pointed. The trees looked calm and silent, but something about the girl's voice made it clear that someone was out there. One of the bikers stepped closer. "You think someone's out there?" he asked quietly. Jack nodded slightly. "That's what it sounds like." Another biker glanced down the road in both directions. The empty highway stretched into the distance under the falling snow. If Lily and her mother had been traveling earlier, something must have gone wrong along the road. Jack looked back toward the little girl. "Where's your mom?" he asked. Lily pointed deeper into the forest. "In the trees," she said softly. "She told me to stay quiet." Jack crouched slightly again so he could speak calmly. "Is she badly hurt?" Lily nodded slowly. "She can't walk very well," she said. Jack glanced back toward his biker friends. They exchanged serious looks. The situation was becoming clear. A mother and child had likely been traveling through the storm when something happened. Maybe a car accident or a fall, and now the injured woman was hiding somewhere in the forest. And the little girl had come to the road looking for help. Jack looked down at Lily again. "You did the right thing," he said kindly. The girl blinked slowly. "I did." Jack nodded. "You were very brave." Behind them, one of the bikers grabbed a flashlight from his motorcycle. Another adjusted the zipper on his jacket against the cold wind. They were already preparing to move. Jack turned back toward Lily. "Can you show us where your mom is?" he asked gently. Lily hesitated for a moment. The forest behind her looked dark and quiet under the falling snow. But then she looked at Jack again. Something about the calm way he spoke made her feel safe. She nodded. "Yes." Jack gave a small smile. "All right," he said. He turned toward the group of bikers. "Grab the lights," he said calmly. Within seconds, several flashlights were switched on. Bright beams cut through the falling snow and pointed toward the dark forest path. Jack looked back toward Lily. "Lead the way," he said softly. The little girl turned toward the trees. And slowly, the group began walking into the snowy forest to find the injured woman hidden in the darkness. Lily turned toward the forest and slowly began walking between the tall, snow-covered trees. The cold wind moved softly through the branches above, and snow continued falling gently around them. Jack and the other bikers followed closely behind her. Their heavy boots crunched against the snow with every step they took, leaving deep footprints along the narrow path that Lily seemed to know by memory. The beams from their flashlights cut through the darkness of the forest, lighting the ground ahead as they carefully moved deeper between the trees. Jack stayed only a few steps behind Lily. He kept his pace slow so the little girl wouldn't feel rushed or scared. "Take your time," he said gently. Lily nodded. Even though she looked small and tired, she walked forward with determination. She knew exactly where she needed to go. Behind Jack, the other bikers moved quietly through the snow. One of them scanned the forest with his flashlight, while another watched the path behind them in case someone else appeared from the road. The deeper they walked into the forest, the quieter the world became. The distant highway disappeared behind them. Now the only sounds were the soft crunch of boots in the snow and the quiet whisper of wind through the tall pine trees. After a few minutes of walking, Lily suddenly slowed down. Jack noticed immediately. "Is it close?" he asked softly. Lily pointed ahead. "Over there," she said quietly. The beam of Jack's flashlight moved forward between the trees. At first, all he could see were shadows and snow-covered branches. But then the light revealed something else. A figure. Someone was sitting beside a fallen tree. The person leaned against the trunk, wrapped in a thin winter coat. Jack immediately moved forward. As he stepped closer, the flashlight illuminated the woman's face. She looked exhausted. Her pale skin and tired eyes showed that she had been out in the cold for far too long. Lily ran forward. "Mom," she said softly. The woman slowly lifted her head when she heard her daughter's voice. Her name was Emma. Emma looked relieved when she saw Lily standing safely beside the bikers. "You found help," she whispered weakly. Jack quickly knelt beside her in the snow. Up close, he could see that she was shivering badly. Her breathing was slow and uneven, and her leg was stretched out awkwardly in front of her. "What happened?" Jack asked calmly. Emma took a slow breath before answering. "Our car slid off the road," she explained between breaths. She paused for a moment, as if trying to gather enough strength to continue speaking. "The storm got worse faster than we expected," she said. "We tried to drive to the next town." She glanced down at her injured leg. "But the car lost control on the ice." Jack nodded slowly. It wasn't surprising. Mountain roads during snowstorms could become extremely dangerous in minutes. Emma continued speaking quietly. "When the car slid into the ditch, I managed to get Lily out," she said. Her voice trembled slightly. "But when I stepped out of the car, I slipped." She looked down again. "My leg twisted badly." Jack carefully examined the leg without touching it too much. Even through the heavy fabric of her pants, it was clear the injury was serious. Emma looked up at him again. "I couldn't walk very far," she said. "So we came into the trees to get out of the wind." Jack glanced toward Lily. The little girl stood beside her mother, holding her hand tightly. "She told me to stay hidden," Lily said quietly. Jack nodded. "That was smart." Emma gave a weak smile. "I told her to stay quiet and only go to the road if she saw someone safe." Her eyes moved toward the group of bikers. "I guess she chose well." Jack smiled slightly. "Yeah," he said. "She did." Behind them, the other bikers gathered around. One of them handed Jack a small emergency blanket from his motorcycle gear bag. Jack carefully wrapped the blanket around Emma's shoulders. The warmth helped stop some of her shivering. Emma exhaled slowly as the heat began returning to her body. Jack looked at her calmly. "You're safe now," he said. Emma's tired eyes filled with relief. For hours she had been sitting alone in the freezing forest, hoping someone would come before the cold became too much. Now a group of strangers had appeared when she needed them the most. She looked at Lily and squeezed her hand. "Thank you for being brave," she whispered to her daughter. Lily smiled softly. Jack stood up and looked toward his biker friends. The situation was clear now. Emma needed medical help, and quickly. Jack turned back toward the injured woman. "Don't worry," he said calmly. "We're getting you out of here." The quiet forest around them was still covered in falling snow as the bikers gathered around Emma and Lily. The flashlight beams moved slowly across the white ground while the wind whispered softly through the tall trees above. Even though the storm had not completely stopped, the thick forest provided some protection from the cold wind. Emma leaned carefully against the fallen tree, while Jack and the others examined her injured leg. It was clear she had twisted it badly when she slipped after the car accident. Jack crouched beside her again. "All right," he said calmly. "Let's see if we can get you standing." Emma nodded weakly. She was exhausted after sitting in the freezing forest for so long, but the presence of the bikers had already given her hope. Two bikers stepped forward to help. One of them gently supported her arm, while the other carefully helped lift her from the ground. Emma winced slightly as she put a small amount of weight on her injured leg. "Easy," Jack said softly. "Don't rush it." With careful movements, the bikers helped Emma slowly stand upright. Even though she could barely put pressure on her leg, she was able to remain balanced with their support. Another biker walked over carrying a thick emergency blanket from his motorcycle gear bag. He wrapped it gently around Emma's shoulders. The warmth immediately helped protect her from the freezing air. "Thank you," Emma said quietly. The biker gave her a reassuring nod. "No problem." Meanwhile, another rider knelt beside Emma's injured leg to check how serious the injury might be. He carefully pressed around the area to make sure nothing was broken. "It's probably a bad sprain," he said after a moment. "Still needs a doctor, though." Jack nodded. That confirmed what he had already been thinking. Emma needed proper medical attention, and quickly. Jack stood up and looked around at his biker friends. They all understood the situation. Snow was still falling, and staying in the forest any longer would only make things worse. Jack spoke firmly. "We need to get them to town." The other bikers immediately nodded. There was no hesitation. Without wasting a second, the group began preparing for the trip back to the road. One rider turned toward Lily and gave her a friendly smile. "Looks like we're going for a little ride," he said. Lily's eyes widened slightly. Even though the situation had been scary earlier, the little girl was now fascinated by the group of bikers around her. She had never seen so many motorcycles before, and now they were helping her and her mom. The bikers began moving quickly but carefully. Two riders supported Emma as they slowly walked her through the snow toward the path that led back to the road. Jack stayed beside Lily, keeping the flashlight pointed toward the ground so she could see where she was stepping. "You doing okay?" he asked gently. Lily nodded. Yes. Her small boots left tiny footprints beside the much larger ones made by the bikers. After several minutes of walking through the trees, the faint glow of headlights appeared through the forest ahead. Their motorcycles? The group had returned to the edge of the road. The long line of bikes stood exactly where they had left them, partially dusted with fresh snow. Jack walked over to his motorcycle and brushed some of the snow off the seat. Another biker helped Emma sit carefully on the back of one of the bikes while two others kept her balanced. "Take it slow," Jack reminded them. Roads still icy. The riders nodded. Meanwhile, Jack turned toward Lily. "You're riding with me," he said kindly. The little girl looked at the motorcycle in front of her. It looked huge from her point of view. "Really?" she asked. Jack smiled. "Really?" He gently helped her climb onto the front seat of the bike so she could sit safely between his arms. "Hold on to the handlebars," he said. Lily gripped them carefully. Behind them, the other bikers were finishing their preparations. Engines began starting one by one. The deep rumbling sound of the motorcycles echoed through the quiet winter road once again. Lily looked around with amazement. Her earlier fear had completely faded. Now she felt something different. Safe, protected, excited. Jack adjusted his gloves and looked toward the group. "All right," he said calmly. "Let's get them to town." One by one, the motorcycles began moving forward. And Lily watched in amazement as the unexpected rescue convoy slowly rode into the snowy night. The snow continued falling softly across the quiet mountain road as the bikers prepared for the ride. The forest around them had grown darker now that the sun had completely disappeared behind the mountains. Only the white glow of snow and the bright headlights of the motorcycles illuminated the road. The cold air moved gently through the trees as the riders made sure everything was ready before leaving. Emma stood beside one of the motorcycles, leaning carefully against the shoulder of one of the bikers for support. Her injured leg still made it difficult for her to stand properly, and every movement required caution. One of the riders stepped forward and spoke calmly. "All right, let's get you seated." He carefully positioned himself beside the motorcycle and gently helped Emma climb onto the back seat. Another biker stood on the other side of the bike to keep it steady while she sat down. Emma winced slightly as she moved her injured leg. "Easy," the biker said, reassuringly. "We've got you." Once she was seated securely, the biker wrapped the warm blanket tighter around her shoulders to protect her from the freezing wind during the ride. Emma took a deep breath. For the first time since the accident, she felt a small wave of relief. They were finally leaving the forest. Nearby, Jack stood beside his own motorcycle while Lily watched everything with wide eyes. The little girl had never been this close to so many motorcycles before. The shiny metal, the large tires, and the powerful engines made the bikes look almost like giant machines from a movie. Jack knelt down beside her. "You ready for a ride?" he asked with a gentle smile. Lily looked at the motorcycle, then back at Jack. "Is it safe?" she asked quietly. Jack nodded. "It will be. I'll make sure of it." He lifted her carefully and placed her on the front part of the motorcycle seat, so she could sit safely between him and the handlebars. "Right here," he explained. Lily settled into the seat, holding onto the handlebars with both hands. Her small blue jacket moved slightly in the cold wind as she looked down at the glowing lights on the motorcycle dashboard. Jack climbed onto the seat behind her and placed his arms gently around her to make sure she wouldn't lose balance. "Hold tight," he said kindly. Lily nodded and tightened her grip on the handlebars. Behind them, the other bikers finished preparing their bikes as well. Helmets were fastened. Gloves were pulled tight. Engines were ready. Jack pressed the starter button. The motorcycle engine roared to life. The deep rumble vibrated through the cold air, echoing across the quiet forest road. Lily's eyes widened with amazement. She could feel the power of the engine beneath her. One by one, the other motorcycles started as well. The once quiet forest road filled with the steady roar of engines. But even with the powerful sound of the bikes, the riders moved carefully. Jack slowly eased his motorcycle forward onto the snowy road. The tires moved gently across the icy surface, while the bright headlights illuminated the winding path ahead. Behind him, the other bikers followed, forming a small rescue convoy. The group rode slowly through the forest, making sure the road remained safe for everyone. The snow continued falling around them, sparkling in the beams of the headlights. Lily looked around in amazement. The forest looked magical at night. Tall trees stretched high above them while snowflakes drifted through the air like tiny glowing stars. She glanced back slightly toward the biker riding behind them. Emma sat securely on the back of another motorcycle, supported carefully by the rider. Even though she was tired and in pain, she managed to give Lily a small, reassuring smile. Everything was going to be okay. Jack kept his eyes focused on the road ahead. The mountain road twisted gently through the forest, and the snow made the surface slippery. But the bikers were experienced riders. They kept their speed slow and steady as they moved carefully toward the nearest town. For several minutes, the convoy continued riding through the snowy forest road. The quiet night was filled with the steady rumble of motorcycle engines and the soft whisper of falling snow. Lily felt something she hadn't felt earlier that evening. Safety. Just a short time ago, she had been standing alone beside the road, scared and unsure if anyone would stop to help. Now she sat safely between the arms of a biker who had come to rescue her and her mother. The convoy continued, moving forward through the snowy road. And ahead, beyond the forest, the faint lights of the town were beginning to appear in the distance. The snowy forest road slowly began to open up as the group of motorcycles continued riding through the winter night. For several minutes, the bikers had been traveling carefully along the icy road, their headlights cutting through the falling snow, while the rumbling sound of their engines echoed softly between the trees. Then something appeared in the distance. Small lights. At first, they were only faint glowing dots far beyond the forest. But as the convoy continued forward, the lights grew brighter. The town, Jack noticed them first. He leaned slightly forward and adjusted the motorcycle's speed so the group could safely approach the edge of the road leading into town. Behind him, the other bikers followed in a steady line. Lily sat quietly in front of him, still holding tightly onto the handlebars as the cold winter wind brushed against her jacket. When she saw the glowing lights ahead, her eyes brightened. "We're almost there," Jack said gently. Lily nodded. The motorcycles slowly rolled out of the forest road and onto the main street that led into the small town. Even though it was late evening, several buildings still had their lights on. Warm yellow light shined through the windows of small shops and houses along the street. The convoy moved carefully through the quiet town roads until Jack spotted a familiar building. The local medical clinic. A glowing sign stood outside the building, and the light from the entrance shined brightly against the snow-covered sidewalk. Jack raised his hand slightly, signaling the other bikers to stop. One by one, the motorcycles slowed and parked near the entrance of the clinic. The engines shut off. The sudden silence returned to the street. Only the soft sound of falling snow remained. Jack carefully helped Lily climb down from the front seat of the motorcycle. "Stay right here," he said kindly. Lily nodded. Meanwhile, the other bikers quickly moved to help Emma. Two riders supported her carefully as they helped her step down from the motorcycle. Emma winced slightly as her injured leg touched the ground. "Easy," one biker said calmly. "We've got you." The group helped her move slowly toward the clinic entrance. The door opened almost immediately. A nurse had already noticed the line of motorcycles outside. Behind her, a doctor stepped forward. "What happened?" The doctor asked quickly. Jack explained the situation. "Car accident on the mountain road," he said. "She hurt her leg and was stuck out there during the storm." The doctor nodded. "Let's get her inside." The medical staff quickly brought a wheelchair and helped Emma sit down carefully. They rolled her inside the clinic where the warm air immediately replaced the freezing cold outside. Lily followed closely behind them. For a moment, she stood quietly near the entrance of the clinic. The bright lights inside made everything feel safe again. Doctors and nurses quickly began examining Emma's injured leg. Jack and the other bikers waited near the doorway. After a few minutes, the doctor returned. "She'll be all right," he said reassuringly. "Just a bad sprain and some exhaustion from the cold." Emma looked relieved. "Thank you," she said softly. Meanwhile, Lily stepped back outside where the bikers were standing. The snow continued, falling gently under the streetlights. She walked over to Jack and looked up at him. Her small eyes were filled with gratitude. "You helped us," she said softly. The words were simple, but they carried all the emotions she couldn't fully explain. Jack smiled warmly. He knelt down slightly so he could look her in the eyes. "That's what friends do," he said kindly. Lily smiled. For the first time that night, the little girl no longer looked scared. Instead, she looked safe, protected, and grateful. Behind them, the bikers stood quietly beside their motorcycles, knowing that the most important part of their ride had just happened. Sometimes the road leads to unexpected places, and sometimes it leads to people who need help the most. The snow continued falling softly outside the small-town clinic as the night grew quieter. Warm yellow lights shone through the clinic windows, creating a comforting glow against the dark winter evening. Inside the building, doctors and nurses were taking care of Emma, making sure her injured leg was properly treated and that she was recovering after spending so long out in the freezing cold. Outside, the group of bikers stood beside their motorcycles along the snow-covered street. The powerful machines were now silent, their engines cooling slowly in the cold air. For the past hour, the town had witnessed something unusual. Dozens of bikers had arrived in the middle of a snowstorm, but they hadn't come for trouble. They had come to help. Jack stood near his motorcycle, adjusting his gloves while watching the soft snow fall under the streetlights. His biker friends were nearby, quietly talking while waiting to see if Emma would be all right. After a few minutes, the clinic door slowly opened. Lily stepped outside. Her small blue jacket looked brighter under the warm glow of the lights behind her. She carefully closed the door so the cold air wouldn't enter the building. Jack noticed her immediately. He walked over and knelt down slightly so he could speak to her at eye level. "How's your mom doing?" he asked gently. Lily smiled. "The doctor said she's going to be okay," she replied. Jack nodded with relief. "That's good news." For a moment, the two of them simply stood there quietly while snowflakes drifted around them. Earlier that evening, Lily had been standing alone beside a cold mountain road, hoping someone would stop to help. Now she stood safely in front of a warm building, surrounded by people who had come to rescue her and her mother. She took a small step closer to Jack. Then suddenly, she wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug. The tall biker froze for a second, surprised by the sudden gesture. Then he smiled and gently patted her back. "Thank you," Lily said softly. Her voice was full of sincere gratitude. Jack chuckled quietly. "You're welcome, kid." She stepped back slightly and looked up at him again. Jack nodded toward the clinic door. "Take care of your mom," he said kindly. "I will," Lily replied. Behind them, the other bikers were already preparing to leave. Helmets were picked up. Gloves were tightened. One by one, the riders walked back toward their motorcycles. The moment of rescue had ended. Now the road was calling them again. Jack stood up and walked back to his bike. He placed his helmet on and swung one leg over the seat with the practiced movement of someone who had spent years riding across highways and mountain roads. Around him, the other bikers climbed onto their motorcycles as well. The quiet street filled with the sound of engines starting. One by one, the bikes roared back to life. The deep rumbling sound echoed softly through the small town streets. Lily stood near the clinic entrance watching them. Even though she had only known these riders for a short time, she knew she would never forget what they had done. Jack looked toward her one last time. He raised his hand slightly in a friendly wave. Lily waved back with a bright smile. Then the convoy of motorcycles slowly began moving down the snowy road. Their headlights shone through the falling snow as they disappeared toward the highway beyond the town. Within moments, the powerful sound of the engines faded into the distance. The street became quiet again. But the memory of that night remained. Inside the clinic, Emma was safe. And outside, a little girl had just learned something important. Sometimes heroes don't wear uniforms. Sometimes they don't appear on television or in the news. Sometimes they arrive quietly, help someone who needs it, and then continue down the road. And sometimes those heroes ride motorcycles.